Hello, this is Brent Holtman, and I have Engage Executive Groups. And today I've got Robert Fleming, who's president of Black Square Technologies. And Bob, thank you for joining us for a second podcast to follow up on some of the things that we talked about on our prior session. And everybody's got your spreadsheet in front of them. And I'm excited to have you walk us through that since the focus of today's session is on the business leadership concerns when it comes to network security.
Great. Well, thanks for having me again, Brent. I guess you haven't learned your lesson yet.
Right.
So the purpose of the spreadsheet that you all see today is to help us understand from a leadership perspective the difference between how secure we think the company and the network are versus the actual realistic concerns that each of these categories represents to a leader or an owner of a company. So I've asked Brent to review this a little bit and come up with some ideas as to what should fit in each category. But if you don't mind, let me walk through the categories. The first category we see here in C4, this box right here, is going to be the answer to the question which is right over here. The question goes like this: how secure would we like the network or our network to be? We know that 100% is not possible. Likewise, we know 0% is not possible. So the question really revolves around how much risk is leadership willing to take to engage in this business operation called network security. So that being said, Brent, roll the dice and tell me what you've got here for a number. How secure would you like your network to be?
Well, I would overall really think that 95%, because as you said, 100% is not possible, but.
Okay, so let's do that. Let me plug in 95%. Okay, so notice it comes up green. Green is good. Orange is bad. Okay, so let's sort of walk through the categories here. If you don't mind, we'll just walk through them one at a time and get an answer for each one. So the first row or a column over is operating systems. If you're using Windows and or Mac, how secure, in your leadership opinion, do you think currently your operating systems are?
Oh, the OS operating system,
we know that things happen. We know that Windows and Mac both provide updates. They provide configuration patches and fixes. So all that in mind, as a leader of a company, how secure do you think your operating systems are?
Yeah, and that's a good point. Because there is a lot of stuff that just comes at us. I don't know, 80, 85%.
Okay, so that's two numbers.
Let's go with 80.
80? Okay, so notice 80 is not green. So there's room in this particular category to have that discussion with your network security team to uncover how we can get from 80 to 85% or 90%. But remember your goal. Your goal is 95%. So right now we're below that goal, aren't we?
Yep.
Okay. So let's move over to the next box here, which we've called onboard software applications. So in onboard software apps, we're trying to manage all of these various tools and other applications that are now embedded in our systems. So that would be the statement, and the question would be, how secure do you think this particular category would be?
Well, if the operating system's only at 80, those I wouldn't think would be any better. Let's go with 80.
Okay. Throw another 80 on the board. There we go. Okay. Next question. It's a little different type of question. We want to, from a leadership perspective, determine how secure we think the central processing units in our computing machines and our servers are.
That's something that I feel like we have a lot of control over. So I would hope 95%.
Okay, let's go there. Notice we're green. It's a good thing. Now let's talk about Wi-Fi connections. When we discussed in the previous segment, we talked about tips we can all use to try and prevent an attacker from gaining access to our systems. A couple of those tips were, if you're going to be stepping away from the computer, don't let the computer go into hibernate mode, turn it off. Because today's computers, you can turn them back on in a matter of 20 seconds or so. And they're built that way for power on self-testing. So a Wi-Fi connection is one of those areas, like an Ethernet connection, where if we disable that connection, the attacker no longer has access to our computer if they're not already in the computer. So Wi-Fi connections might be considered a fairly secure area of this exercise.
Really, because I guess my thought being, since it's not wired, it's not hardware, that might be a more vulnerable area. And I was thinking maybe 75%.
Okay, so let's throw 75 in there. Okay, and notice we're not back to green again. Okay, so now let's talk about VPN connections. There are a number of different VPN products out there. Some are free, some aren't free, some are enterprise related, some are small business related. So up to you.
Well, it seems like the pitch for VPN services is always about how much security benefit is gained by doing that. So based on that, I would like to think it's 90%.
Okay, well, let's remember what a VPN connection really is. In layman's terms, it's having access to a secure on-ramp to the internet freeway.
Yeah, so that part of it at least, I would hope.
I'm sorry, what was your response?
90.
90, yeah. We're back to green, good deal. Okay, now let's talk about routers, modems, firewalls. And all of those typically require some type of a user name and a password or an admin permission set.
Yep. Yeah, and if my CPUs are at 95%, since these are intended to provide security to the systems, I would think they should also be at 95%.
Yeah, and in a way they're designed to prevent what we might call upstream into your network attacks.
Right.
Whether it's by email or another method. I'm sorry, 95?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Next would be an alternative to how we store data. Typically in the past, we've stored data in an archive fashion or on servers, in containers, and now we're in the process of moving a lot of, in fact, most of our data, if not all of our data, into a virtual storage environment.
Yeah, so, and I can't help but think about the lack of real control we have, and the fact that, the idea of it's in the cloud, we really don't know where it ultimately is physically being kept. And human error considerations, shoot, 80%.
Okay.
And I think that might be a little optimistic.
80%. So before we move to the next category, if an attacker has access to your credentials, you do realize that none of this is secure.
Right.
Okay, so the number would go from 80 to 0.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's a tough call. However, you can ask your cloud storage provider, no matter who it is, we want to know the physical locations of the rack space or servers or AWS physical compounds where the data is stored. And you can also ask what the alternative backup locations are. So for example, if you're doing business with a governmental agency and they require you to use a cloud that stores data in a physical location within the United States, you can ask for that.
Oh, good. So you can make sure it's not in North Korea.
You can try your best, put it that way. Yeah. Okay, so next category, and my apologies for dragging this out. Next category is with relation to the internet access. A lot of these are acronyms. In fact, they all are, but domain name service, SSL, HTTPS, which we all know by hearing that name so many times. and transport layer security, or TLS. So as a leader of a company, how concerned or comfortable are you with some level of security there?
To me, that one is really questionable because there's so much uh, potential for error where you end up at a site you didn't intend to, where something gets redirected. It just seems like that one is maybe the worst of the ones we've talked about. So 65%.
You ask and it shall be delivered.
All right.
So next is a complementary category, which is the other side of the coin. And this relates to our user base. From an endpoint protection standpoint, how secure do we think our network is from 0 days, injectables, malware, spyware, clickbait, ransomware, phishing attacks? And a lot of this, again, has to be directly related to a FAR category over there in row R, which would be how secure is our broad-based population that's using our network.
Right. Well, within an enterprise where there's professionals that are paying attention to that, employees are trained, that should help. But I also know there's been some pretty high-profile stories in the news about an employee inadvertently letting this happen because they clicked on something they shouldn't have or accepted something they didn't intend to. So again, I would think that might be down around 65%.
Yeah. There we go. It just dawned on me I could have used a copy and paste. So next category is something that's come up in the last 10 years or so, and that's a password manager solution. It can be used to hopefully protect those credentials, which we all want to guard with our lives. So if you use a password manager solution and you've read reviews, how secure do you think the average or general password manager solution might be that you may employ within your company would be the question.
Right. I would expect at least 90%.
Okay. There we go. So we're back to green. Okay, green is good. So now next question would be, how do we store data and how secure do we think those data storage devices are? So in the example I've listed here would be a physical hard drive in a computer or a solid state drive in a computer.
Well, in my mind, that would be up there like the CPU, so 95%.
Okay. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about more like a large scale application that's been delivered to your company by an outside vendor. The vendor is going to provide updates and education and upgrades along the way with product fixes and patches. So how secure do you think that particular category would be?
Well, I would expect that they're vigilant about making that safe, and I've never read of any issues related to that I recall. So I would think that would be up there in that 95% range as well.
All right, give it a shot. Again, I should have copied and pasted, but that's okay. So now a really interesting category from a security perspective is the multifunction printers and fax machines. Fax machines may be almost non-existent in many companies. However, multifunction printers are always around. So we know that when we scan a document or we copy a picture, there's a record of that in the MFP itself.
Sure.
So how do we manage that, and conversely, how secure can we assign a value to this MFP or the fax machine?
Well, since that stuff is designed to give a whole lot of accessibility to a whole lot of users, it seems like a vulnerability inherent in its purpose. And that would lead me to think 65%, 70, well, let's say 70%.
Okay, let's try that. %70. Okay, so last but not least, and then you win that beautiful car. It's called the Aston Martin. How secure would you consider physical protection? And this is a sort of a wide open category. You might consider physical protection to be if I don't lose my computer or it's not out of my line of sight, it's more secure.
Okay. Again, I would think that that's going to be pretty high. So let's put that at 90%.
Okay, so before we type 90% in, which will be green, which will be great, let's consider this. An attacker has gained access to your network, and he's actually found his way into each individual corporate computer, or he's gone to the servers, and he's found what's important to him, and he's offloading that data. Now let's consider what physical protection really means. Does it mean access to the box, or does it mean the edge points of the network are secure?
Well, that's a good point. That definitely brings that number down. Because considering that, then some of these other low points really are in the answer, right? So 70%.
Okay, let's go there. Okay, so we've covered various topics. And by the way, just for you and your listeners' information, about 1.5 years ago, we were asked by IBM to develop an algorithm which would help speak to the various complexities of networking for whether it's a small company, a mid-sized company, or an enterprise, or even an agency. So this is a draft of that work that we did for IBM through Osterman Research. So there is some validity to what we've done. You might suspect the answer based on what you've given me to populate these various fields might be sort of good, like 60, 70%, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not great, but good. Yeah.
Well, it's where we start. And again, remember, there's a distinctive difference between the leaders and visionaries and those that are tasked with driving the company forwards and onwards and upwards, and those that do similar work in the form of network security. Network security, or a CISSP's main responsibility would be to try and prevent attacks or insertions through any of these categories. And of course, there are a number of other categories that we could discuss at another time. So I guess we should go take a look, but before we do that, notice over here we have 2 more categories that I've added, which we really haven't discussed. So the first one is human concern, or a fear factor for humans who are trying really hard not to make a mistake, that make a mistake. It's possible. I mean, it happens all the time. And we don't always get to read about it in the papers or online. And the second category is security awareness education. We always look at security awareness as a really good tool, but sometimes it doesn't fit in the budget. And there are a number of really good security awareness companies out there. So if it's in the budget, it really can provide benefit to the users. However, sitting down with your network security folks, or even having an offline session to understand what happens when you see an email that comes in that looks a little bit fishy, what do we do? How do we determine it really is fishy? So that being said, those are categories for another day. So we determined that we wanted to see a number up here that would represent close or something close to this 95% number, right?
Right.
Okay, so here's your number, 5.25%. It's a little shocking.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, I will also suggest to you that being a leader is different than being a network security professional. And that if you look at the categories that we have here, most likely your security professional or contracted security professional will change some of those numbers in those various categories, probably to the lower side to prevent or to be secure in using some of that budget to fortify those particular areas of concern. That being said, this box here, the security professional's answers or result, I should say, will most likely be drastically lower than the leadership's response, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I would have guessed the opposite, but as you explain it, that does make sense, that they are both more aware and more in, focused on it. So that does make sense that it would be. And, Bob, one of the things I really like about this from a business leader's perspective is this is such a great way to create a context for having that conversation with those security professionals.
Absolutely. And that's actually why we built this thing at IBM's request. Because it does open the door. And obviously, IBM has a number of clients around the country that are small, mid-sized, or larger. And even I'm sure they work with a number of government agencies. So this is just sort of a starting point. It opens the door for those leaders who are willing and able to have a robust conversation around these various elements.
Absolutely, that's great. So Bob, if folks that are listening would like to actually dig into this for themselves and maybe the leadership and their CISSP folks to be able to do this exercise, how would they get in touch with you?
Oh, so that's a great question. They can go to our website. They can contact me directly at robert@blacksquaretechnologies.com. If they're interested and we agree on something, we'll provide them a 1-hour review for $250.
Well, that sounds like a deal.
Pretty simple.
Yep. And blacksquaretechnologies.com is the URL for the website, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I think this is really useful and valuable, and that $250 rate seems like a bargain for the benefit in getting awareness and having that dialogue with your security folks.
The other added benefit is that you're speaking to people besides myself who have subject matter expertise in various elements that we've just discussed here.
Yeah.
Bear in mind that any of these categories will prove disastrous if the attacker has access to your system and if he has access to all of your credentials. If he has that, none of this matters.
Right.
It's about rebuilding after the dynamite has gone off.
Yeah, and that's the least desirable position to be in, isn't it?
I would say that'd be absolutely correct.
So says Captain Obvious, yeah. Okay, well, thanks again, Bob. This has been really enlightening for me, and I'm sure for all the listeners as well.
Great. Well, thanks again for your time, Brent. If anybody has any questions, you can reach out to Brent or myself.
My pleasure. Take care.